first off, what factors should you consider in crafting your college list? Then we'll talk a bit about how you can categorize schools on your college list. And then finally, we'll talk a bit about the resources students can leverage to build and refine their college lists. So let's first talk about student preferences, because I think a logical starting point for creating a college list is what a student actually wants and what a student is interested in terms of building out a list. So the first thing is going to be past school visits. So what types of experiences have you had from past school visits? Those are pretty important when it comes to figuring out, what schools you might like or not like. And given that we are still living in somewhat of a pandemic impacted world, you want to be signing up for virtual information sessions where possible. I actually was talking to a colleague the other day, and we both noted how a lot of universities are tracking the whether or not students are opening up their emails. If these are prospective students, and so opening up emails from schools that you may be considering and attending their info sessions is a great way to start creating your own list. You also want to consider geographic location. Are you preferential toward the East Coast or West Coast? Would you rather go to school in the Midwest or the South? So all of these geographic factors can play into your list. And then you also want to look at school size. And, I would say in addition to school size, you also want to consider the faculty to student ratio. And those two oftentimes are inversely correlated, where you've got a bigger school size, you typically will have a smaller faculty to student ratio. And so what you really want to do is see if a small or a large faculty to student ratio works for you. My personal bias is that students should go to schools where the faculty to student ratio is higher, so that you get more exposure to professors and people who will be supervising you. Another factor to consider is your proximity to family. So for a lot of students, they really care a lot about being close to mom or dad or aunts and uncles. And certainly the transition to college life can be, filled with some challenges. And so having family close by can be of a great benefit to students. And so particularly during the recent lockdowns, we've seen a lot of students wanting to stay closer to home because of the COVID-19 situation. And then finally, campus culture. So campus culture does matter for a lot of students. Are you going to be in a very academic campus environment? Are you going to be in an environment that's really focused on sports? Is it focused on Greek life? So these are all kind of different things to consider, from a campus culture perspective. Another thing you can consider with your college list and how you create it is your intended major, okay? And so some colleges tend to have better resources with certain majors, okay? And so for instance, UC Berkeley's engineering program, it's ranked 3rd in the world. And so, for a lot of students who are looking at top engineering schools, you may be interested in knowing that its alums and its co-founders can be found among some of the largest companies in the world. If you're interested in business, perhaps you might want to consider NYU Stern. So it's got 202 full-time faculty, 74 adjunct professors. So it's got a broad range of academic programs. And the school is located, right smack in the center of Manhattan. So that's, those are some things to consider. And then you've got, schools like Hopkins that are very research focused. They receive a lot of funding from the federal government. They've produced a lot of amazing scholars. And so you may be interested in this school in particular if you're interested in a research science major. So intended major is very important in considering, what schools you want to put on your list. And then in terms of your intended major, you want to consider your fit. So for instance, with science, typically a student profile will contain higher grades in science and math courses, as well as SAT subject tests. You'll also have some involvement in science extracurricular activities, including science fairs and competitions, as well as any research experience you may have in a particular discipline. And this same can be true for engineering or CS. So typically, you're going to have higher grades in science and math courses. You'll be involved in different activities that are related to what you want to study or explore. Then also research experience in any science or engineering discipline. You've also got business. So with business, you want to have higher grades. In math, you want to be involved in business-related activities like DECA, FBLA, and robotics. And you also want leadership experience in school or local government, or working on kind of your own personal signature project. The humanities, government, I think it's pretty straightforward in terms of like understanding that you'll want to have taken lots of courses in those fields, and you'll want to have been involved in lots of activities in that space and gotten involved in a lot of leadership experience. And then finally, in the arts, you want to be involved in art-related extracurricular activities. You really want to make sure that you're developing a portfolio in your intended area of art or music. And you really want to have a private instructor that can vouch for your ability level. So these are all some things to consider when looking at intended major. Okay. So, in terms of data points to consider, okay, so you really want to look at national averages for GPA and SAT-1 score. That's really like the first set of criteria. Then also you want to look at Naviance information, so like the average GPA of students admitted, the average SAT or ACT score of students admitted. Okay. You also want to look at application history, the number of students who've applied, the number of students who were admitted, and then people who were enrolled. You also want to look at what percentage of students were admitted based on the regular deadline or regular decision, and then what percentage were admitted based on their early deadline. I will say that in recent years, we're seeing more students coming in early. So colleges are now filling up their classes with students from their early action and early decision pools. You also want to look at average GPA and test scores, as well as the percentage of students that are waitlisted. And as you're considering all of this, you want to understand what the university's rationale is in bringing students in. And so one metric that you can dig it up for most schools is the yield rate. And this yield rate is the number of students that accept offers of admission divided by the total number of students offered admission. And if you're curious about which school has the highest yield rate, it's Harvard. And then as you go down the rankings, that yield rate declines. And the reason universities want to, have programs like early action and early decision, have programs that perhaps are binding from an admission standpoint, is they want to be able to boost their yield rates. And so all of this feeds into that. I know it's kind of like a little known tidbit about, the college admissions process, but, these are all kind of things to consider as you're plotting out your school list. So now in terms of pulling it together, schools can be categorized into, 3 buckets: safety, realistic, and reach. And so as you're looking at the data and you're inputting your GPA and your SAT score, if a school is a safety school, you have approximately 75% more of a chance of being admitted. If it's realistic, you're likely falling into the 40 to 60%. And if it's a reach for you, you have less than a 30% chance of being admitted. And, these categories are not sort of hard and fast, but generally speaking, safety schools, there's a very, very high likelihood you're going to be admitted. With realistic schools, there's a good chance you're going to be admitted, but it's not a guarantee. And then with reach schools, typically it's really tough to get in. And I would consider, for instance, all of the Ivies, Stanford, and MIT to be reach, regardless of a student's profile. Having done admissions counseling for more than 10 years, I can say that you never really know whether a student will get into a specific school. So if a school is, let's say, in the top 15, more often than not, regardless of a student's profile, it will likely be a reach type of school. And so how can we, determine whether, your reach realistic or safety, or let's say a school is reach realistic or safety? So you can kind of use this chart where, if you're above average, above the accepted average by, 0 to 15.15 points, um, you know, uh, let's say, you could be reach if it could be a reach if you have a below average SAT or ACT score based on what the published statistics are. And then if you have an above average SAT or ACT score, that school can be between reach and realistic. And then if you're way above the average for your SAT or ACT score, then the school can be realistic. And so this gives you a sense that, if you have a below average GPA, you're pretty much always going to fall into the reach category for that school. If you've got an above average GPA, based on your SAT score, you could be reach, you could be between reach and realistic, or you could be realistic. And then, of course, if you've got an above average GPA and an above average SAT or ACT score, your school is going to look like a safety. So this table gives you a sense of kind of where you might fall. And it's important to keep in mind that average GPAs, average SAT and ACT scores change every year. So the more that you can do research and see what the latest published statistics are, the better you'll utilize this table. So some other factors to consider are AP tests. So a student's chances of being admitted might be impacted by their AP score submissions. So you want to think about, has the student taken tests that are related to their preferred major? Are there students in the district required to submit AP tests even when the schools are not requiring them? And then what is the student scoring in relation to national averages? As you may know, the subject tests are no longer being offered. They're really not being considered anymore from an admission standpoint, so I wouldn't worry about them. But the big trend that I noticed with the AP tests is the more you take and the better you do in those tests, the better your chances are of gaining admission to a top school. And realistically, with a lot of the discussions that are happening around the SAT and ACT, I predict that the AP exams are going to matter more in the years to come, particularly given that with the decline in the SAT or ACT, likely the decline will happen with both. But with the APs, all kinds of schools can offer AP courses. If you have a good AP instructor, that instructor will likely prep his or her students well. And so AP tests are likely going to matter more in the years to come. Now, some other factors can include extracurricular activities. So some key questions you want to have with your activities include, do you have leadership experience? Have you demonstrated genuine interest in the area of your preferred major? So are you involved in activities that relate to your preferred major? Do you have research experience, particularly if you're going into science or engineering? What examples of excellence do you have in terms of awards and honors and accolades? Have you shown examples of prolonged commitment to a particular interest or activity? And have you shown genuine care and compassion for others in your community? So those are all things that you want to consider as you're building out, your profile. And then, in terms of what schools to target, given your profile, this is a great chart that kind of shows you, in terms of the official ranking that comes out of the US News and World Report. So if your, SAT or ACT is in this range and your average AP scores are like this and your unweighted GPA is this, you're probably going to be looking at a school ranked between 1 and 16. And then, with schools between 17 and 28, you're looking at SAT or ACT scores in this range. You're probably getting, 3s, 4s, and 5s on your tests, and then having a 3.75 and up GPA. And then 29 to 45, you're going to have this type of a profile. And then 46 to 65, you'll have this type of a profile. And this is really like a rough guideline. So, a student who's got, this type of a profile, may apply to some schools that are ranked, in the 1 to 16 range, or may drop down to a 29 to 45 school for some safety. So this is just a general guideline for what schools to target. And by target, I mean schools to consider as more realistic. Again, my guidance is for the schools ranked 1 to 16. Don't think that if you have this type of an academic profile, you're going to be a shoo-in. That's definitely not going to be the case. Now let's talk a bit about early admissions programs. So basically what you've got, in terms of early admissions is early decision and early action. And the difference between early decision and early action is that early decision programs are binding, whereas early action programs are not binding. So you don't have to attend if you get in via early action. And you can typically look at a school's early admission statistics from a particular high school, either using your school's Naviance. Now, some schools don't have Naviance. In fact, many schools don't, but some schools do. You can track those historic admission statistics. And then you can also go to a college's admissions website and see those statistics. So you want to see what those stats are like. Typically, early decision gives you a bigger boost than early action in terms of your admissions chances. So the earlier you apply, in general, there's a better chance of getting in, and early decision gives you an even better chance compared to early action. So definitely consider early decision or early action applications to schools where your average GPA and SAT or ACT meet the cutoff. And if you're applying early decision, you want to make sure that you're absolutely confident that you'll attend that school. Consider the fact that you're not going to have much leeway when it comes to financial aid. So if you're, not concerned about financial aid prior to applying, you can certainly go ahead and do early decision. With early action and with regular decision, you do have quite a bit of leeway. And so if you get into an early program and then you get your regular results, you can always come back to your early school and say, look, I'm getting more money from, school X, but I want to go to your school. So can you give me, some flexibility? So some other, factors that may impact admissions chances include the following. So household income, whether you're a first generation college student, and that gets reflected in the Common App forms and most of the basic forms for college application. There's legacy, if certainly legacy matters, ethnic background, athletic recruitment, if you're being recruited for performing arts. The rigor of your senior year grades matters a lot, and it's increasingly going to matter a lot more with, students being waitlisted in many situations, or applying to early decision 2 programs, which is early decision with a deadline of January 1st. Another factor to consider is the trend in your grades. So an upward trend looks good. And they're also looking for students that are involved from an extracurricular perspective, in the things that are available to them at their school. So these are some other factors to consider. Now, as you're looking at different schools and starting your own research, these are some great online resources you can utilize. So Niche, the US News and World Report, Princeton Review, Unigo, College Confidential offer great information when it comes to schools and their characteristics. I personally prefer Niche and US News and World Report. I think they're phenomenal resources. Niche does a great job of calculating admissions chances to top programs. And so I would look at Niche and US News and World Report. So some final thoughts. Start working on your college list early. Work with a counselor to validate your expectations and make sure your profile is evolving every year of high school, because your college list should change with your profile. So if you're doing better academically or better from an extracurricular perspective, definitely want to update that list. And also, consider if your grades are slipping or your scores are slipping, you may want to adjust that list. Now, some considerations you should have given what's been going on with COVID-19. You'll likely need to find ways to stay busy during the lockdowns. I think with this summer, there are many students who are able to access internships and in-person opportunities, but a lot of folks are still living under some form of partial lockdown. So you still need to find ways of staying busy. Early applicants are going to be valued more and more because of those yield rates and also the money coming into universities. Financial aid will likely decrease and scholarships will become more competitive. And that's where you as a student want to be an advocate for yourself and negotiate financial aid where possible. And then finally, wait lists will likely be used more frequently in upcoming application seasons. And so there is a letter of continued interest that typically a lot of students will compose. And so your ability to, you know, write convincing letters will be to your benefit. So at this point, I'd like to take any questions folks may have. Jesse, I know you always bring me great questions. So any questions you have as well, I appreciate your forwarding them to me. Yeah, so a typical formula I like to have is 4-4-2, 4 reach, 4 realistic, and 2 safety. And so, I think with that type of a formula, you have at least 2 safety schools, because let's just say, God forbid, your one safety school falls through, you've got another one. And then you've got 4 solid realistic schools and then 4 reach. Now, some students have things like guaranteed admissions programs in their state, or let's say they're applying to the UC system and their GPA and scores are high enough such that they have a high likelihood of getting into one of the many campuses in the system. So you can kind of have one safety in those situations, but I personally prefer students to have 2 safeties. Yeah, I think you have to give everything a full court press. You have to give every school um, a full court press, because you never know how things pan out. So, in terms of focusing your efforts, given the way that essays kind of play out, and also preparation plays out in terms of forms and application systems, you really want to give every school and sort of like a full court press, because you may find that you get into one of your reach schools, but then there's a realistic school out there that wants to give you a lot of money. That's not something that you just want to write off. And so I think consider like a full list. Consider a list that you feel confident in working hard on each of your schools, be it that you have 5 schools or 10 schools or 15 schools. So there's early action, early decision. Yes. So yeah, early action. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of this planning goes in beforehand, before you even like submit anything, submit any applications. I would say go for early decision if you are very confident that the early decision school you've picked is your number one choice. Because what you're saying is, I'm applying early to this school, and I'm going to find out before most of my application deadlines and most of the schools that will ever get back to me that if this one school says yes, I'm going to go. So, with those early decision schools, you want to be thoughtful in your choice, and you want it to be that like crown pinnacle school in your list. Okay, great questions. So I want to say thank you, everyone who's joining us. We're of course going to post this as a rebroadcast. Hope everyone's having a wonderful start to their summer, and I look forward to seeing you all in our next